afternoon, everybody. Hi, my name is Cassandra Goldie and I'm Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Council of Social Service, and a very warm welcome. Thank you all for joining us here today for this launch of the Blueprint Framework for Fast, Fair and Inclusive Climate Change Action. Just a short note, please use the chat function if you want to raise questions or are having technical issues. And do be aware that this launch is being recorded to share with those who are unable to attend today. Before we begin, it is my absolute pleasure to again welcome, introduce Uncle Michael West from the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council. Uncle Michael, well known to many of you, is a member of the Stolen Generations. He was born, raised and lived his whole life in Sydney communities. He has held many roles, including Delegate of the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples and Director of the New South Wales Indigenous Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to invite Uncle Michael to give the welcome to country. Thank you, Michael.
I was going to say thank you, Cassandra. And I'd like to say Bajari Gamarua Gadigal Bidjigal Eora, because our headquarters is on Gadigal, but I'm over at Bidjigal today. I'd also like to acknowledge all the wonderful lands that you guys are on and we're streaming to. There's rich history there, wherever you go and turn around. We've had a Blackfoot walking across that land, whether male or female or gender identified, for more than 65,000 years. And climate, addressing the climate problem, it's actually more than a problem. It's we're heading for a catastrophe if we don't address it. I think it's an important thing to understand that we just got to do things smarter, I think, is what we've got to do. And we've got to care for country and caring for planet Earth, Mother Earth, because she cares for us. Everything actually comes from her when you think about it. Everything from our buildings to our food to our clothes, everything we have is from Mother Earth. And she is speaking louder and louder to us every year. It's important to respect her, care for her, and she will care for us. Here in Sydney, we are lucky to have one of the most beautiful harbours in the world, if not the most beautiful harbour in the world. And I love when you see Barani come in, like they traditionally would do, Barani with the little cars. Barani are whales, and they would actually come in and they would go to Darling Harbour, which is Gomera, and they would rest there. They would know that they would be safe because they're part of the Gadigal clan's totems. Also, on the north side over at Balls Point, there's a Barani engraving, which is important. So obviously, the clans that are connected to the water would have many different totems, and Barani obviously would be one of them, and different names for the whale up and down the coast. And also in the harbour there we have barra, which is eel. Obviously at Parramatta's Barra Marico, and that's where they've got the name of Parramatta from, is Barra Marico clan out there, barra eels. And those eels actually migrate to the South Pacific on their journey. And there is a whole creation story of Sydney Harbour being created by a giant barra. And that barra is just resting off of Balmain. There is a little island there called Memel, 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 eye of the barra, eye of the eel. And the Sydney clans like Gadigal, Camaragal, the other side of the coat hanger where North Sydney is. Then you have Wongal, where the Olympic Park is. You also have Wallamadigal, where Ryden that is, over that side where Bennelong is resting, being a partner of a strong Camaragal woman named Barangaroo, where we have a piece of land also named after her. And also, it's so important to respect our totems. We lost many of them the last few years because of climate change, with floods and also with that terrible firestorm a few years ago. We had that terrible firestorm that took out many of the animals, 1 billion or 2 billion, I think it was, and they're our totems. And our totems are a spiritual connection to them, and they're also our family, and that's why Barani would come in and rest. Also, we need to treat all the totems with respect. I know there is one that's not getting respected much. It's a white bird. It has black tail feathers. It has somewhat long legs. It has a long neck and a long beak. It's called the sacred ibis. I was going to say, please don't call me a bin chicken, thank you. I'm not. I'm not a bin chicken. I'm the sacred ibis. I'm one of the totems of people. And also in New South Wales and up in the N2. So we need to respect them because they are here because of climate change. They are only with us going through our bins, looking a little bit dirty because we haven't been caring for country. And we need to remember that. And it's also important to take a moment's silence to pay respects to ancestors. We've had a difficult few years with the pandemic, and it's been a difficult week in Sydney, I think, the last week. So we need to remember that. And we need to remember and pay respects to those we've lost in the pandemic. They're not just numbers, people with names, their own ambitions, their own families, community. And also, we need to pay respects to all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander tradition owners, elders, and custodians of past and present for looking after country, spirit of country and culture, because our culture and sites are your culture and sites to protect for humanity itself. Those Brewarrina fish traps, the dinosaur prints, part of the dreaming over in Western Australia, Noongar, they all have an important part to play, and we need to protect it for humanity itself. So if we just had a moment's silence, a moment of paying respect, and a moment of reflection. In Sydney, we have three waterways, rivers, which are the boundaries of our nation. We have the Hawkesbury, Nepean, and Georges. On behalf of Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council members and our elders, welcome everyone here. We'd like, as I said, like to acknowledge all different places we're streaming to and that you're on, and to learn the history there. We want everyone to continue the fight that you are having around this wonderful country for protecting Mother Earth. And it's great all the people are putting the country that they're on there, I can see coming up. And there are rich stories. And look, it has been difficult with Saturday in Sydney, and then last night in Sydney, and then also for the queer community a few weeks ago with a loss in their community. We need to remember that we all belong to many different communities, and that we need to look after and care for each other and treat each other with dignity and respect. I was going to say it always was, always will be Aboriginal land never ceded. I know we had that referendum. It didn't go the way Aboriginal people wanted, but we can do better. We've progressed somewhat, but there was a lot of disinformation out there that was happening to us. Like colonisation has been good for us, and that gave us running water and food. But we always had running water and food. They're called rivers and streams. Yes, rivers and streams, and bush tucker was all around us. Unfortunately, as you know, being ACOSS and members of ACOSS, that the same communities, whether regional or remote, they don't have the access to fresh water, the aquifers, the rivers and streams, they're polluted or drought, and food is trucked in. I think is so important. And that only the fresh food lasts for a few days. We're a rich first world country. We can always do better, and we should do better. I'll leave you with those thoughts. I hope everyone has, we have Anzac coming up next week. My family's in the ADF multiple generations. I think it's important that we always respect people and respect our legacies. I'll leave you with those thoughts, and have a good day and the rest of the week, and have a beautiful weekend, and take your shoes off and listen to the birds, connect with Mother Nature, and be kind to the ibis. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for that welcome to country, and I guess the sensitivity and care in which you've brought us into this room together. It really is. I want to acknowledge I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in Redfern, very close to Bondi Junction, and just to thank you so much for acknowledging the very different experiences that have people had, the extraordinary, care that gets brought to that, and also the pain that's being experienced. And I'm very grateful to you for your setting the scene for us here this afternoon. We absolutely acknowledge the significant legacy and ongoing contribution of First Nations peoples in caring for country. That relationship to country is especially relevant, of course, to this afternoon's discussion as we bring fair, fast and inclusive climate change action campaign and the Blueprint Framework, because it is really a disconnection with the environment that in many ways has led to the problem of climate change. And it's going to be through greater connections to the environment and other people that will show us paths to a more sustainable and equitable future, which is where we want to be heading. I'd also like to acknowledge the contributions of First Nations organisations and individuals, amongst many others, to the development of this Blueprint Framework, which we are here to launch today. ACOSS is delighted to be launching this document together with you. It has been the result of extensive consultations across the community sector, climate and environment movements, unions, researchers, and people with lived experience of disadvantage. We want the Blueprint Framework to provide a guide to government climate change policy that is more fair, equitable and inclusive. The Blueprint's development came about through the recognition that climate change impacts people experiencing financial and other forms of disadvantage first, worst, longest and hardest, because we don't have the resources and choices to protect from its impacts and to build resilience. And if we have a slow, inequitable transition to zero emissions that does not support and include people experiencing disadvantage, the consequences are even worse. For the government, this could result in reduced community support for the transition to zero emissions that we need. The Blueprint Framework is a guide to how Australia can reduce greenhouse gas emissions fast, which we must do, to reduce our contribution to climate change and at the same time support people experiencing disadvantage and increase their resilience to climate change impacts that are already locked in. The Blueprint Framework proposes the federal government, number one, establishes a vision that you can see in the centre of this slide to guide climate change action in Australia that is more equitable, inclusive, sustainable and resilient to climate change impacts. Two, to amend the Climate Change Act 2022 to include objectives, principles and processes to guide a fair, equitable, inclusive transition to net zero emissions and adapt to the climate change impacts already locked in. Three, to establish dedicated and place-based engagement mechanisms for affected people, communities and advocates to participate in planning and decision-making that will prioritise people experiencing disadvantage. Four, to strengthen Australia's national emissions reductions target to align with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And five, to reform 12 strategic policy areas to fairly distribute the impacts and outcomes of action on climate change so that people experiencing disadvantage can benefit and are protected from the worst of negative impacts. And you can see those around the outside of the diagram in this blueprint. So these are the 5 key asks of the federal government. We believe if implemented, the Blueprint Framework will help tackle the climate crisis and deliver significant social, economic and environmental benefits for everyone. We're very fortunate this afternoon. In a moment, you will be hearing more about where to get information and resources on our campaign. This is a shared campaign for all of us. Actions your organisation can be taking to advocate for this campaign, and we'll of course be very keen to have your questions. Next this afternoon, as you look at the Blueprint Framework, thank you again to all of those who've been involved in developing it. I'm really delighted now to be handing over to my colleague Rochelle Braff, who's ACOSS Senior Advisor for Climate and Energy, to chair the rest of the proceedings and to open up our panel discussion. Thank you so much, Rochelle, and for all the work that you have put in to getting us to this point. Thanks, Rochelle.
Thanks, Kath, and hi everyone. I must remember to take myself off mute. So great to have so many of you on the call today. We will be talking about how everyone can access and use the Blueprint Framework and advocate for its ask. But first, before we do that, we wanted to first hear from some of the organisations and the people who've been involved in the development of this document about why they consider fair, fast and inclusive climate change action and this campaign to be important to them and to the people that they advocate for. Now, I know that Jeff Smith has to leave us at 2 p.m, so I'm going to ask him to speak first. So Jeff is the CEO of Disability Advocacy Network Australia. He's a solicitor. He lives with a disability, and he has had a lifelong commitment to social justice and the environment, and he's worked for many years in the climate change space. So I'll hand over to you, Jeff.
Thanks so much, Rochelle. I appreciate the invitation, and can I begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from the land of the Gadi people of the Eora Nation, on land which has never been ceded. So in the limited time available, I just want to talk about a couple of headline things. The starting proposition for my short talk today is that people with disability are and will be increasingly disproportionately impacted by climate change. So we've done some recent work in the heatwave space, which is just but one of the ways that people with disability are disproportionately impacted. In that space, for example, heat waves are the deadliest environmental disaster. Of 10 people who die from a heat wave related illness, 9 of those people are people with disability. It's estimated by the World Health Organization that by 2050 we'll have a 5-fold increase on current levels of deaths by heat waves, and so on and so forth. It's a pretty dramatic situation which is occurring now and will continue to get worse in the future. Notwithstanding that disproportionality, it also remains the case that disability voices are not routinely at the table, that those voices are excluded. It also remains the case that the primary narrative around people with disability is one of vulnerability, as the primary narrative and the main narrative that exists in this space. As a consequence of not being at the table and that narrative, then harm is caused. There is a lot of harm that is happening to people with disability by dint of the fact that their concerns are not taken seriously and they're not sitting around designing the solutions. The other thing as well, turning that into putting it more positively, is that by not having people with disability at the table, opportunities are lost. I know from my own situation that people with disability are the best problem solvers in the world. They have to be innovative. Very often they are the person who's got the most at stake, and the set of solutions in front of them they need to forge for themselves. So by not taking those voices seriously, not having that seat at the table, then you're losing that innovation and you're losing the problem-solving opportunities. In terms of the set of policy solutions in this space, well, of course, it's going to depend on the nature of the issue. And we, again, with the piece of work that we did in the heatwave space, we carved out a set of solutions in that space which will begin to help people with disability to adapt to climate change and to improve their lives and to steer away from those catastrophic consequences which they may be facing. But at a more generic level, there are a couple of key things that I think it's worth mentioning, and pretty obvious things, I think. First, give people with disability a seat at the table at the planning stage, at the implementation and post incident, if you like. So a seat at the table is absolutely crucial. Oftentimes in the disaster preparedness scenarios, we've seen, whether it be the floods in across the eastern and western seaboard, or the fires, again, probably across both the east and west of Australia, but more recently in the south of New South Wales. We've seen that the communications around disability have been lacking, and that again, there's been real consequences of that. So we need to improve the communications. My final point, as I move into the last 20 seconds, I see, is we need to work collaboratively, and that pretty much applies across the board. In the climate change space, we have a lot to learn, for example, from our Pacific neighbours. We have a lot to learn from working collaboratively in civil society sector with organisations like ACOSS, but also forging relationships between the disability and the climate movement, as well as, of course, with some of those government organisations and authorities that have sprung up in relation to national emergencies. Thank you so much.
Oh, look, thank you so much, Jeff, and for making some of those issues so concrete for us. It's been really valuable to hear that. We are having a couple of problems connecting with some of our presenters, but I'm very pleased to see that we have Pastor Ray with us. So I am going to try and connect to him. So I'll ask Pastor Ray Minikin to speak about why these issues are important for First Nations people. Pastor Ray is a co-chair of the Indigenous Peoples Organisation. He's a director of Bungie Consultancies and a descendant of the Kabi Kabi Nation and the Gurung Gurung Nation of Southeast Queensland. He's also a descendant of the South Sea Islander people, and we're very pleased to have him with us today. Thank you, Pastor Ray.
Good. Can you hear me? Well, that's good. Listen, I'll try and be as brief as, and thanks for the opportunity of speaking. I wanted to just talk about one of the most important issues for Indigenous peoples, and it comes out of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and its acronym is FPIC, Free, Prior, Informed Consent. And what we mean by that is that for Aboriginal people anyways, consent must be given voluntary and without coercion, manipulation, or any form of pressure or intimidation. Prior means consent must be sought well in advance of any authorization or commencement of activities, with timely disclosure of information on the nature, size, pace, reversibility and scope of any proposed project or activity. Informed means Indigenous people must be provided with all the relevant information in a culturally appropriate format, including potential impacts, benefits and risks associated with the project. Consent means Indigenous peoples have the right to approve or reject the project. This is not merely a right to be consulted, but to actively participate in decision-making processes. And this particular declaration is found in Article 19 of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Article 19 states this, that states must consult and cooperate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free, prior and informed consent before adopting and implementing legislative or administrative measures that may affect them. And the second article is Article 32, number 2 in that article says that states must consult and cooperate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their lands or territories and other resources, particularly in connection with the development, utilisation or exploitation of mineral, water or other resources. And that's the importance of FPIC, or the free, prior and informed consent. It's the protection of our sovereign rights. It also gives protection to our culture and integrity, because many Indigenous communities have spiritual, cultural and ancestral ties to their land that require protection from external impacts. And so FPIC ensures that these values are respected and preserved. Environmental stewardship, which comes into this particular category that we're speaking about today for ACOSS. Indigenous peoples often maintain a deep understanding of their ecosystems. Matter of fact, one of my things that I often say to people is that in the Aboriginal education system, before a young Aboriginal person reaches the age of 12, they already are, they've got a PhD in environmental science, in the ecosystems, in astronomy, astrology. They know all of this stuff. We know this stuff because that's what we're brought up with in our systems. So it's crucial that consent is managed in these with these resources sustainably. And if you follow through on FPIC, it avoids conflicts, and many arise from unauthorised use of Indigenous lands, leading to more stable and productive outcomes for all stakeholders if you follow the principles of FPIC. So consultation processes are important. Legal enforcement is important. Monitoring and compliance is important. And so FPIC is not just legal requirements, but a commitment to ethical standards and respect for human rights, reflecting a shift towards more equitable governance and integration of Indigenous peoples in decision-making processes that affect their lives and their futures. And sadly, we haven't seen much of this being operating in our country, when you can see Juukan Gorge and other places being disgorged in so many different ways, that I had to bring this to the table here today. And I'll close with this. If there is one country that I would suggest you look at in terms of environmental protection, that country would be Costa Rica. Because back in 1948, the thing that they did and made a decision about in their terms of their government is that they would not pay for a military, but they would put all of that money that they would pay on a military into their environment. And if you can imagine in our country, if that little country can do that, the only people that invade them now are tourists. If Australia could take an example out of their book and stop all the stupidity around our military and the spending on it, and spend it all on our environment, we would have a sustainable future for future generations. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, thank you so much, Pastor Ray, for those comments and for bringing attention to the rights of free, prior and informed consent and its support for First Nations self-determination. It's so important in this context of climate change policy and associated policy. Next, I would like to introduce Peter Sutton. Peter is an lived experience advocate and a retired banker. He currently relies on the Disability Support Pension and has previously received New Start, which is now called Job Seeker. I'm going to ask Peter to speak about why these issues are important for him and for others who are experiencing disadvantage. Thanks, Peter. Peter, you are on mute. If you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Hello?
perfect.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much, everybody, for the opportunity today. There is, I think, a very definite link between climate change and poverty. It does affect, for example, Can you still hear me? The screen seems to have frozen. Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, that's fine. There is a definite link between climate change, I think, and poverty. Extreme weather events do result in, for example, loss of housing. They result in loss of infrastructure, which has an impact. Many of our people with lived experience are on the disability support pension, such as myself, or the age pension, which is $1,100 per fortnight, and those on New Start or Job Seeker get even less than that. Where this impacts climate change, for example, is people on the pension do not have the capital required to upgrade homes, to buy new air conditioning units. Many of us face extreme heat in the summer, extreme cold in the winter. Many of our people live in rental accommodation, so they have no control over the property. So they can't, for example, install solar panels or add extra insulation, things like that. It's too expensive. When you're on $1,100 a fortnight, you're struggling to live as it is. Those on Job Seeker are earning substantially less. And it does have real health impacts, because if you're not eating, you're more susceptible to illness. Sudden cold snap or hot snap does have effects on one's health. Sometimes you think, I need to go out to a shopping centre or somewhere where it's cooler, but you still have to get there, and there's a cost to doing that. So there is a real financial impost brought about by climate change. I am fortunate in that, unlike many, I do own my home, so I'm lucky in that respect. However, I live in a block of apartments, so I can't upgrade the property because it's owner's corporation strata title, and the capital cost of doing so is prohibitive. But many others, even in social housing, don't own the property, so they can't upgrade. So there is a cost. But my body corporate fees have jumped 50% in the year, and that has been linked to insurance premiums. I know many people who can't afford have dropped insurance on their homes and contents because of rising premiums, which is linked, of course, to climate change. So it does have an impact on all of us. Other aspects of it, of course, is that food prices. We have a sudden flood event or a drought event, it wipes out a crop of vegetables. Next thing you know, the vegetable prices have shot through the roof. So there is a link between poverty and climate. The other thing I want to touch on, it doesn't affect me directly, but I did mention it in our initial discussions, is that we need to put in place transitional arrangements for people in employment. It is a concern for people who might work in, for example, the coal mining industry or the electricity industry, that they're going to lose their jobs. Yet I believe there are far more jobs in changing renewable than there are. For example, a new nuclear power station is constructed. That could be run from a control room in Beijing, Mumbai, or Madrid. Whereas solar panels, windmills require more maintenance on the ground. You'll still need the transmission towers to transport the power. So we need to ensure that people are reskilled, retooled, and have the opportunity to go to new jobs. But it isn't a very important issue to me. Most of us can't afford to meet our day-to-day basics. We're under pressure to put in new shower heads, new air conditionings, new fans. So there are health impacts which affect the most vulnerable amongst us. I think that's probably covers it fairly well, I think.
Thank you, Peter. Well, thanks for those insights and for pointing to, how poorly designed climate change policy and associated policies are impacting on people who, are doing it tough, but also for highlighting the kind of opportunities for people in our community if we can get the policy settings right. So we're going to go now to our last external speaker, who is Emma O'Neill. Emma is a Senior Policy and Advocacy Advisor at Good Shepherd Australia and New Zealand. Good Shepherd's Australia's oldest and longest running not-for-profit that specifically supports women and girls and families. And I'll invite Emma to speak about how Good Shepherd came to be involved in the climate change space. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Rochelle, and thank you to you, Callie and Cass and ACOSS for producing this terrific blueprint, which is a fantastic resource and advocacy guide, I think, for the whole sector. So it's terrific to have this overarching framework. I'd just first like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from unceded Wurundjeri country in lovely Naarm. So for those of you who don't know, Good Shepherd is a national organisation that, as Rochelle said, supports women, girls and families to be strong, safe, well and connected. So the world we want to see is one where all women enjoy dignified income and financial well-being and have full and dignified lives free from violence. So in this spirit, our programs and services focus on family violence support, financial counselling and capability. You may have heard about our nationwide no interest loan program, which is quite well known. We also run the Financial Independence Hub program with CommBank, and that's for women recovering from financial abuse. So people might say, well, what's the connection with climate change? There are huge connections with climate change in our work. Climate justice for women and families is now a focus under our new strategy, which covers the next 5 years. And we've decided to elevate climate change in our mission because we can see that climate change is increasingly shaping our clients' lives. Being a national organisation, we see the impacts of climate change right around the country. We've got services in the western suburbs of Melbourne, in Western Sydney, which are particularly exposed to extreme heat and heat inequality. We've got services right up to far north Queensland, where we see sort of different climate impacts again. In the past, we've provided financial recovery programs in East Gippsland and Northeast Victoria following the horrendous Black Summer fires. Last year, we were providing financial recovery services in South Australia after the floods. So we're already there and seeing a lot of impacts. So these impacts look like a whole range of things. As Peter spoke about, a standout issue is housing. Our clients are heavily exposed to unsafe, expensive housing that's far from climate ready. And I think it's under-recognised that this is a gender issue. So women and families rely heavily on private rental housing, social rental housing. Women make up 62% of social housing residents. So they're very exposed to the poor energy performance and the lack of climate resilience in this housing. I think a sleeper issue that we're hearing about more and more at Good Shepherd is mould, the mould that grows after Sydney's intense rainfalls that are characteristic of climate change after floods. We're seeing this more and more in our work. As I touched on before, our clients are really exposed to dangerous places that are at risk of fires and floods and extreme heat. Again, we're starting to see a gendered story here because it's circumstances like family violence that mean women end up in places that are higher risk, that are perhaps cheaper, nominally cheaper to live in because they have to take what they can get. So there's a gender story emerging there. Likewise in energy. So Good Shepherd's clients are more at risk of energy stress during climate change. Women go into this period already more likely to experience energy payment difficulty than men, which is kind of under-recognised as well. So we're very alert to what this means for cooling costs during heat, during periods of high fossil fuel prices, which is essentially what we've seen over the past 2 years. And as Peter said, the women and families we work with, typically being on low social security incomes, generally can't defend themselves against those high prices by installing solar. Climate-related financial shocks are another area. That's something Good Shepherd has been working in for years, decades, but we're now starting to see the climate-related nature of those financial shocks. And insurance is a big issue in that respect. Insurance is becoming simply unaffordable, or I would say effectively withdrawn when the premiums are so high that they're beyond what most people could afford. So in the absence of those financial protections, adequate disaster support payments from the Commonwealth Government and other governments, people are coming to us to take out no interest loans to replace essential household items lost in disasters. And we're also seeing clients exposed to changing family violence risks. This is really important. It started to surface after the Black Saturday fires in Victoria, that disasters create a whole new set of situational violence risks similar to COVID. Things like social isolation, things like interrupted support services. So some of our practitioners saw this after the horrendous floods in southeast Queensland a few years ago. So this is coming up in our work as well. So for all of these reasons, equity and inclusion are absolutely vital in climate change policy. Good climate policy cuts across multiple government portfolios, including social portfolios like housing and health, and recognises that climate change is one of the defining issues affecting women and families, and ensures they have the resources and rights to cope, and actively advances social justice. Good climate policy is social justice policy. We're entering a new age. And
that
I think
be a good place to end.
I'm going to
That's
stop
okay.
now,
Yeah.
but I can go on later. Thanks very much, Rochelle.
That was perfect, Emma. Thank you so much for sharing with us the journey that Good Shepherd has been on, and really highlighted the whole, the diversity of policy in which climate change intersects, and the need for equity and inclusion across all of that. Look, thank you to all the speakers for giving us an insight into the real life consequences of climate change and the transition for people who are experiencing disadvantage. And thank you to all of you who are attending today for your interest in and support for this campaign. It's been a long but valuable process of development. So I now want to talk with you about the Fair, Fast and Inclusive Blueprint Framework's key resources and how you can get involved. So Danny, if you could share slide 3, that'd be great. So today we're launching the Fair, Fast and Inclusive Blueprint Framework document. It sets out the elements that Cass spoke about in her introduction. So we talk about having a vision, 7 principles to underpin policy. We identify 12 areas for reform, and call for community engagement mechanisms and stronger emissions reduction targets. And one of the asks that we intend to campaign around over the next 12 months is to amend the Climate Change Act to insert equity and inclusion provisions that will guide us in the transition to net zero emissions and help us to adapt to the climate change impacts that are already locked in. So the Blueprint Framework document is accompanied by a couple of other documents. So there is a background document which has some contextual information about why these issues are important for government policy. And then there's a 4-page summary that you might find useful, particularly if you're wanting to share it with MPs that you might be meeting, for example. And then the last one there is we want to plan to develop a detailed policy document, and I'll speak a little bit more about that in a moment, but that is yet to come. So all of these documents can be found in the Fair, Fast and Inclusive website, which is located at that site link on the screen, and maybe Danny can drop that into the chat. And we'll be populating the website in the next coming months with information about the Fair, Fast and Inclusive campaign. So please feel free to use that as a resource. Our strategy for this campaign is to build the capacity of organisations around advocating on this issue, to raise awareness about the issues that are outlined in the Blueprint Framework, to support advocacy, to promote policies, and to mobilise action. And so this is where you come in. Danny, if you could share the next slide, please. So we are inviting you now to engage in 5 advocacy actions as part of this campaign. The first one is please do sign on to the Blueprint Framework, and we're asking for organisations to sign on by the 3rd of May. From that time, we'll be using the Fair, Fast and Inclusive Blueprint Framework in our advocacy with government, and we invite you to do the same as well. I'll ask Danny if she can also drop the link to sign on in the chat. Some organisations have got on board early and have already signed on, and you can see their logos on the screen now. And we hope to have very many more. Now, whether you sign on or not, and we really hope that you do, please feel free to use the Fair, Fast and Inclusive Blueprint Framework and other documents in your own advocacy. We really want you to use them as a resource. Okay, so the other advocacy actions we're asking you to take on. Second one is to promote the Fair, Fast and Inclusive Blueprint Framework to your members and networks, and ask them to sign on to help build that momentum and demonstrate to government that there's this groundswell of advocacy. Third is that ACOSS is going to release a public petition, which will call on the federal government to amend the Climate Change Act and take on other actions. And we need your help in promoting that petition. And then the fourth one is please join us in advocacy activities. We will be, amongst other activities, we'll be leading a parliamentary delegation in the last week of June, and we invite you to participate in that. So we'll send out materials to support these activities to all of you, so keep a lookout for those. And then the fifth advocacy action we're asking you to engage in is we will be developing that more detailed policy work around the 12 strategic policy areas that were identified in the Fair, Fast and Inclusive Blueprint Framework. So after this launch, we'll send you a policy paper for your written feedback, and we'll also invite your participation in some follow-up consultation workshops, and we hope you'll be able to contribute to that process. Okay, Danny, if you could share the next slide. Right, so for more information, please go to the Fair, Fast and Inclusive website, and that link again on the screen. There's the sign up page, and you can also contact myself or Kelly Court, who is well known to most of you, I'm sure, but is the Program Director for Climate and Energy at ACOSS. And Danny, you can stop sharing that slide now. Okay, so now we would like to invite you to ask any questions about the campaign and the Fair, Fast and Inclusive Blueprint Framework. Please use the chat function to ask your questions. I'm going to ask Kelly to jump in to help facilitate this section. As I said, Kelly Court is our Program Director for Climate and Energy. Kelly, have there been any questions so far?
Yes, sorry, double multitasking just then. Yes, so we've had two questions. One is around gender lens, and it was really great to have Emma to talk about that from Good Shepherd. But there was just a question about how much of a gender lens did we put over the blueprint? Was a gender impact analysis conducted when developing the blueprint? Has it been aligned with the Lima Work Program on gender under the Paris Agreement?
Oh, they're great questions. Look, we have tried to talk about gender where we could in the Blueprint Framework document. It is an overarching document, and some of the early feedback when we initially sent out the discussion paper for feedback, it came back and said, you know, this is a really long document. Can we make it as short as possible and as, you know, in simple language and so forth? And we've really tried to accommodate that. I mean, where it's going to be important to bring in that gender lens and other lenses that highlight issues around differentiated impacts and the need for differentiated policy will be in that detailed policy document. So really invite all of you to bring that kind of analysis to those consultation sessions and to your written feedback on that. We didn't conduct a detailed gender, didn't apply a detailed gender lens across the blueprint framework, but we certainly would like to do that in the more detailed policy document to really highlight those issues. So I hope you're able to engage with that. Ellie, did you have
Thanks.
anything you wanted to add to that?
And this probably goes to another question about education, just noting that we've talked heavily about human rights as one of the key principles in the blueprint, and that we've footnoted that our principles cover the principles in Human Rights Declaration, which covers things like gender, education, and a whole range of other rights. So that's certainly a key lens for us as human rights and everything that sits under that. Another question was, how do we ensure our remote communities on mainland and island communities in Australia are heard along with that of the Pacific?
Yes, I mean, if you're talking about are heard within this document, we in the development of this document, we did have a dedicated session to speaking with First Nations organisations and people about the critical issues, the risks and the opportunities that affect those people and communities. And so we've tried to highlight that within the blueprint framework, and you'll see that there's a dedicated section to that. And we've also tried to raise issues where they've come up in other sections of the blueprint framework, in other of the 12 detailed policy areas. Again, we're hoping to raise those issues in the more detailed policy analysis and policy document. So we're hoping that that they can be brought to the fore there. So I can only encourage you, if you've got issues, to bring to that discussion and to that more detailed policy work, to please engage with the process going forward. But absolutely, these are fundamental issues for our First Nations and Islander communities, and they are already experiencing significant disadvantages we're all aware of with the closing the gap targets that we need to reach. So we really need to put that front and centre in this work.
Thanks, Rochelle. I'm just conscious of time. And so just to add to that, a key part of what we're trying to do is embed this inclusion processes to make sure that all communities that are impacted are included in policy development. And so someone asked, what's the timeline for equity and inclusion additions to the Climate Change Act? It's one of the key reasons why we want to amend the Climate Change Act. We'll be campaigning for the next 6 to 12 months on that, and we'll be in contact with people about how you can help us with that campaign to get that inclusion, those amendments, I should say, to the Climate Change Act. If there's any more questions, I'll monitor them and I'll get back to people directly, but we should probably, 2 minutes to go, we probably should hand over. Thanks, Rochelle.
Okay, so look, thank you for your questions, everyone. And if you've got further questions, please feel free to email Kelly or myself after the launch, and we will try to respond to those as best we can. I might now hand over to Cass to wrap up, but firstly, let me say this has been an enormous team effort within ACOSS. Kelly and I have worked very closely together throughout this process, but I wanted to say thanks to our colleagues in our comms team, Stacey and Michelle, Cam and Danny, who've helped us, and Alex, who leads that team. Thanks very much for all of your support, and also our previous interns who have helped with organisation of the consultation sessions and so on. But I'll hand over now to Cass to wrap up. Thank you, Cass.
Oh, look, thank you, Rochelle, and to Kelly. particularly want to thank fantastic participation and attendance at this online launch of the Blueprint for Fast, Fair and Inclusive Climate Action. Thank you to all of the speakers, Uncle Michael, for your very warm and generous welcome to country, to Jess Smith from Dana, from Pastor Ray, Emma O'Neill from Good Shepherd, and of course Peter Sutton, again bringing your very generous lived experience to these discussions. This is a very big joint effort, and so I particularly want to acknowledge Kelly Court's leadership in this area as our Program Director on Climate and Energy, and Rochelle Braff, yourself, who's worked tirelessly to bring this really exceptional policy framework and document into the hands of the Australian people at a critical time when we are needing to elevate our collective effort to deliver on the action we need to tackle climate change, but to do it in a way which puts the experience of people who are most at risk at the front of the policy design. I do want to also thank some really important supporters, financial supporters of this work. I know a number of you are online today, so particular call out to the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, to Sydney Myer Foundation, to Paul Ramsey Foundation and Boundless Earth for your faith and generous support for this leadership by the community sector. Thank you to everybody for being involved. Don't forget, please download this blueprint just once, but download it so you got it in your back pocket, and to sign on, please, and to share with your networks, and as in days and weeks as we lead up to the federal budget and beyond, to elevate and lift up our voice for a fast, fair and inclusive climate action agenda, and this campaign will continue until it's done. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.